Hello and welcome to the third edition of the Facebook Live versions of the Animal Rights Show. This is our going to be our second Q&A style format. So with that, Roger, you ready to answer some questions? I hope your mic's working because I'm not hearing anything.
Yeah, I'm just having you on. It's working fine. Hello,
Well, we're three
everyone.
seconds in and you've already tricked me, so there's that.
Well, there you go. What else is new, eh?
Yeah, well, it doesn't take much to trick me, does it? Yeah, it looks like we're already getting some action through the comments. That's great. So as people are joining us, feel free to start thinking about any questions you might like to shoot our way. The whole idea is to make this as interactive as possible because it's really not just about the two of us. It's really about all of us. So even if we miss something in our answers, you can just try to get that comment thread as active as possible.
Yeah, but a correction there, Jeremy. It's not about us. It's about the animals.
That's a good point. And yeah, all of us, including other animals. That's a good clarification.
That's
Yeah, good
good.
to be specific with that.
So we've got our first live question today, but we're asking for clarification for the last part of it. So while that comes through, do you think we should take one of the pre-existing ones from last week, or what do you want to do, Jeremy?
Yeah, sounds good to me. Let's do it.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and read it here. So Carl asks, can you discuss the issue with getting all the different AR groups to coordinate? Is it a pipe dream? Take the examples of human rights types issues in groups like AV and DXE and PETA. There's a huge issue or split in the AR movement, with some not accepting that the founders of the vegan social movement were intersectional in their aims and core beliefs. So I guess it's kind of a two-parter, almost kind of getting groups to coordinate as well as kind of dealing with kind of challenges within groups.
Yeah, this is very complicated in the sense that which groups are we talking about? I mean, for example, the groups that traditionally have cooperated the best and coordinated the best have been the grassroots groups, and so like the hunt saboteurs traditionally, come together for national hits or regional hits, this kind of stuff, and so they've been very good at coordinating and cooperating. The national groups tend to be a bit more different. Although, funny enough, I mean, it's kind of World Day for Laboratory Animals, and when Kim Stallwood was organising those demos, which I think the peak was about 12,500 people at one of the World Day events, about 82, 83.
Wow.
That was a collaboration between several groups. The BUAV, the NAVs, the SAVs, etc. Animal Aid involved. I mean, there was even a coordination of groups for the resetting of the brown dog statue. The little brown dog statue is kind of like a famous statue in the movement, and the original one was kind of smashed up by medical students, and so there was this move to have a new statue created, and that involved a few groups getting together. But in a general sense, I suppose the grassroots have been better at that. In terms of their kind of political aspect, again, going back in the day, that wasn't as prevalent as it is now, because I think people were a bit more aligned politically than they are now, and so this goes into social movement theory. You'll remember, Jeremy, when I gave that talk in VegFest in London, I was saying that from a social movement theory point of view, one of the great things about a social movement for the social movement is the fact that it takes off, and that means a lot of people join, and that means it gets bigger and more powerful and everything. And then the danger of all that is the fact that it takes off and you've got a lot more people involved which don't necessarily hold the same views as the people who founded the organization or the social movement, and so that's kind of what's going on now. So there's a wider spread of political views, I would say, at least in terms of those that kind of get promulgated and spread around. And so I think people who had maybe anti-human views in earlier times were not given a platform, whereas now, of course, they can create their own platform. So yeah, so I think that's a distinct kind of problem in the sense that, I mean, like, it's swings and roundabouts in a way, because one of the great things about the Francione counter movement was the fact that the group, the people he was criticizing all the time couldn't silence him. But it also means that if you've got people with views that are very kind of toxic, or go against the values of the movement, as I would argue it, then you can't silence them either, and so they get to be able to put out their ideas. So you can see it, you can kind of see it both ways in that sense. You can't silence voices, which is a good thing. At the same time, it means that it means that the kind of voices that you probably wouldn't want to be out there are out there. So that means that support comes behind them. So
Kind of butts up against free speech concerns, doesn't it? That kind of comes into that discussion as well.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, going back to the Shack campaign, one of the things, I mean, people know this from watching the Animal People film. One of the things that got Jake and his pals into trouble was the fact that they decided, a little bit like the ALF SG, I think, that if they got a communique from anyone, they would just post it on their website, regardless of what it said. And I think now they're thinking, oh, maybe we shouldn't have done that. Maybe we should have done a bit more kind of editorializing. But of course, that goes against the kind of anarchic kind of structure of that kind of thing. So it's swings and roundabouts, as you say, and it's difficult.
Yeah, and I think to me as far as the back part of the question, I think it's good to remember that we're all humans still. There's not some, it's not like when we choose to live vegan, we all of a sudden remove our humanity. So the wider issues within society are still going to be applicable to the movement. But I think to me, the thing I'd really like to focus on is the coordination, because I do think there's a lot of, I know, Roger, you and I both do street work as one component of our advocacy. And there's a lot of learnings and trying different things out that we could probably gain a lot of efficiencies from. And I appreciate a lot of these groups mentioned try to do some of that. And I think that's something for us all to continue to explore through, all mediums, So not just specific groups, but, even just kind of reaching out and collaborating.
Going to the end part of Carl's question, I think that is an important area, because it's one of the areas of disagreement. You see it on social movement, arguments about this. And, I do kind of really wish that people in the movement were kind of aware that the origin of the movement, I mean, if we started the vegan social movement now, it would be regarded as pro-intersectional. That's how we would call it, And so, I mean, in this conversation, it's probably best nowadays to drop that word. It's very kind of toxic in the movement, intersectionality. At the same time, the values of the vegan movement have always been pro-intersectional, in the sense that it's never been just about other animals, which is a common claim nowadays, and that's actually just not true. So we're back to what we talked about before in terms of focus and scope. It's always been the focus, but it's not been the scope. And if people,
other
if
animals,
people
you
were,
mean? The focus is other animals, but then obviously there's wider issues that have at least the potential. Maybe we should give a quick kind of basic definition of what intersectionality means to the two of us, because I think the first thing before having a conversation, we really got to frame these things. What does it require?
You go first.
Well, I mean, this is something I've been reflecting a lot, especially these last couple of weeks. And to me, it's not just about, I think one of the key concerns people have is that it's going to take the focus off of other animals. And to your point, the focus should still be on them. However, at a basic level, just not making other issues, not making their jobs harder and not being indifferent to them is, I think, it doesn't take a whole lot of energy just to say, yeah, that matters. And, why can't we do both? Is kind of the short answer between, animal rights and human rights, because they are entangled, which is probably the start of a more complex discussion.
Yeah, most people who have this discussion seem to make a slight mistake, in the sense that most people say, Well, I'm just as much in favour of human rights as other animal rights. It's just that I want to focus on the other animal part of it because they rely on our movement. There's no other movement for them and everything else. Well, that's already catered for by the focus and scope issue anyway. So it's almost like there's a problem that has grown in the last couple of years, which isn't really there. And if people understood the values of the pioneers of the movement, then they would understand that the complaint that they're making about the movement isn't really there. This thing about, you intersectionals are coming in and trying to make this a human rights movement. But that's not what it was. The human rights element was always there in the first place. It's just that it's not to the fore, which is fine. I did a recent interview with Seb Alex, who said exactly the same. The fact is, well, you can focus on the other animals, and obviously some people are going to have to do that because we need that. They need that campaigning and they need that advocacy. But it just means that while you're doing that, the point you just made is you don't mess anybody else up. I mean, that's as simple as that. It's quite simple in that sense.
Yeah, it's not saying, let's just say we do 20 hours of street work a week. It's not necessarily saying, okay, now we're going to chop that in half, 10 hours for other animals and 10 hours for human issues. If people do that, I can see a compelling case to be made for that, but that's more on an individual level to me. I think that's at a basic level is just kind of accepting that positive potential. Because I think we're holding ourselves back by reducing the scope of, veganism and the philosophy of animal rights. Because, I mean, who's to say, but if it does have that potential to get us to respect humans through that respect for other animals, why not at least make that a part of the conversation, even if it's not the focus?
Yeah. Also, it takes away a big plank of our opposition. If people say, "Oh, you animal lovers, you only care about the animals. You don't give a monkeys."
Yeah.
Can we say that?
I mean,
You don't give a monkeys about humans. And of course, when you point out that that's actually not true, it kind of takes one plank of their argument away from them completely. So.
because even if people reject the theory behind it, just from a tactical level, I mean, it makes sense to keep that card, as a potential thing to play when we're having conversations with people. That's not, it's all animals, not just other animals. Cool. Well, that was a bit of a opening dialogue, wasn't it? So thank you, Carl, for that. Should we start filtering some of these live questions?
Yeah, we still don't have the clarification of the first one from Lewis Todd, so we're still waiting for clarification on that one. Just the end of the question there.
Maybe we start with Brad's here. I'll pop that up on the screen, maybe.
Okay.
Let me see if I can.
Yeah, with your newfangled machinery you've got there, Jeremy.
I'll figure out how to use it eventually.
Oh,
I got it.
You're a very fast typer, you are.
Do you want to read Brad's question? We'll mix it up.
Chicago are banning horse-drawn carriages at the end of 2020. What are your thoughts on this? Is it a win for animals? Everything just moved. Is it a point? Everything keeps moving. Hang on. Is it a point in favor of pressure campaigns?
Yeah. Yeah. So it doesn't help pressure campaigning. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fine about it. I mean, my position about single issues and pressure campaigns is that they can be abolitionized. In other words, they can be framed within a vegan context, and so long as they're framed within a vegan context, they're okay. And so, just to get a kind of elephant in the room out of the way here, the main opposition to single issues has been from the Francione counter movement, and that began really in 1996 with the publication of Rain Without Thunder, which is a good book. I recommend people getting that. But the argument was always, because at the time in the 1980s, you would get people outside the fur shops going, shame on you, blood on your hands and everything. And they'd be wearing leather coats and leather shoes and all the rest of it. And so that was seen as the problem of single issues. And Francione himself got into bother because sometimes he would turn up as a lawyer at some events, and sometimes the press would talk to him. And he would say, they would say something like, yeah, but you're outside a circus here, but really You just want us to stop eating meat, don't you?" kind of thing. And of course, he would say, "Well, yeah, I'm a vegan. Of course, I would." Right, and that then would anger the people outside the circus, because they weren't necessarily vegans or even vegetarians, right? But all that has changed now, and so you can probably guarantee that most of the people who are involved in that Chicago campaign are probably vegans, and it might even be run by vegans. And so in that sense, a single issue can be abolitionized, and it can be framed. Basically you say, well, look, we're vegans, we're opposed to animal use. This is a form of animal use, and so therefore we're opposed to this. But this is not the deal. This is one of the, we just happen to be here today. I mean, tomorrow we'll be down at the vegan stall, or wherever else we do our stuff. And so again, it's kind of almost like a problem that doesn't exist, because single issues are not really a threat to abolition, so long as they're framed within that context.
Yeah, and it might pull people in that, for whatever reason, those single issue campaigns they feel more drawn to as vegans, as wanting an abolitionist end goal. But if those campaigns didn't exist, I don't know, maybe they'd do less activism. I guess that's one potential risk from a micro level. So giving people that variety. What about the back part of Brad's question is kind of, is it a win for other animals? And I would specifically say, is that an example of successful pressure campaigning? Which really we should have Jake here for some of these conversations, Mr. Pressure Campaign. But what do you think? Do you think I guess there's several layers to that, isn't there? Where does the money that went in, that was tied into that so-called business that was using the horses? Where do the horses go? Do they go to sanctuary, or they shipped to another city? I mean, I don't know the details of these questions, but I think that's a complicated one, and probably takes a bit of research to really get a robust answer on.
Yeah, that is a very important point there, Jeremy, in the sense that a lot of people, when they close something down, say in one particular location, they go, right, victory, and then they don't actually know what happens after that, and so there is a problem there. That if you look at the history of things like banning things in the movement, people don't tend to look at, well, what did that actually result in? What did that actually mean? What was the ramifications of that particular action? And so you need to do some kind of audit after the event, and actually kind of do, you can't just go, okay, we've won that one, let's move on. You need to kind of keep on top of it and find out what actually was the consequences of it. We all need to turn into utilitarians for a second, but we all need to find out.
All right, you're just wanting me to interrupt you, aren't you?
Yeah.
This is the animal rights show. This is not the animal suffering show.
This will push a button. I thought. Yeah. Do I play the utilitarian card on Jeremy now?
Just been waiting to pull that out, see what happens.
Yeah.
See the face gradually get redder and redder.
Yeah, here comes the Ace of Spades. So we got a few comments.
Yeah, let's go to those. So I feel like we've at a surface level kind of answered that, but it probably does require more investigation. I think as long as we're in a capitalist system, it's following the money at a short-term perspective. What happens to the other animals who are in that form of use, sanctuary, or shipped onto another destination. But then from an aggregate perspective, I think we have to look at, show me the money, where is that money going? Those money that's taken out of those, thing, do they invest in McDonald's down the street after that? And, is that a successful pressure campaign? I don't know. Yeah.
So I think Lewis has clarified. Do you want to go to that one?
Yeah, let's pop that up there. So Louis asked, do you think there are any differences between past successful civil disobedience actions and using them for AR campaigns when the ones are being advocated for aren't present in a protest sense? And let's see, Louis has expanded that, the ones whose rights are being violated aren't the ones who are the part of the civil disobedience demonstration. Was the animals may actually be there, for instance, in the farm type setting?
Well,
I said I'd let you take the easy ones, right?
Yeah. So you can have this one, yeah. Well, I mean, civil disobedience has been used in the movement quite a lot. Again, going back to even the World Day issues, there's been die-ins and that kind of stuff. And I remember a time when I think there was about 9,000 people in Trafalgar Square, and they blocked the entire, they closed down all the traffic in central London and stuff. So civil disobedience has always been a kind of Gandhi kind of inspired kind of tactic, which for that reason alone seems to garner kind of a lot of respect. And even the kind of media tend to respect civil disobedience as a tactic because it's so kind of well established. It's kind of what you do. It's kind of, well, you send a petition or you do civil disobedience or do both, that kind of thing. So there has been some of that, and whether whether you can call it successful is another matter, I suppose.
Yeah, it sounds like if I'm reading the question correctly, is that does the animal rights movement have like almost an additional hurdle to get over because the the victims of that we're focusing on aren't necessarily a part of the movement, and I think that's probably pervasive throughout all of our advocacy. How can we really advocate on behalf of them or in solidarity with them when they're not there? That's
Yeah.
kind of
Also,
how I take that.
yeah. Well, the bigger point there is that they also don't get a say in how we do it. So it's not as though the other animals can say to us, well, we like that style of campaign, but we don't want you to do this on our behalf because we don't agree with it. So, so there is that. Even if we want to see ourselves as allies to the other animals, and it's their movement and that kind of stuff, and sometimes you do see that kind of rhetoric being used. Actually, humans are calling the shots in the animal movement, and there's no way around that, unfortunately. Yeah. So, in that sense,
There's no, I guess there's
they,
no direct way around it, but we can be more mindful about that. I mean, throughout everything. I mean, even something as simple as shifting from that human-centric, I'm vegan, so that animal-centric, I'm vegan because I don't want to support foods or rights being violated or we want to frame that. Um, and through our advocacy, I've got some sheeps up on the background here, but beyond that, the animals aren't really here. It's two humans talking about them, so the other animals are absent. So I think it's something to really pull in our advocacy as much as possible.
yeah, your feed is cracking up a little bit there, Jeremy. But I think we got what you were saying in terms of the precise thing about civil disobedience. It's ironic, really, in the sense that people ask other people not to bring other animals to those kind of events. To actually make them not present, which is quite an interesting thing because some people think, well, they should be represented, as it were, in demos or protests or acts of civil disobedience. And of course, people think, well, it's not a good idea.
And even, I mean, that's part of a really big question, isn't it? How do we obtain consent for other animals? For instance, at sanctuary when we're filming them and trying to tell their story, and walking that fine line. I know the way I do it is I let them approach me, and if they show any disinterest, I just leave them be, versus almost kind of forcing a situation to happen, which I'm not necessarily suggesting any specific instances of that happening, but I think that is a risk. But, really being mindful of their interests, which I think ties into what you were saying about bringing other animals to demos.
There are some sanctuaries, of course, that won't kind of allow the public in because they see the sanctuary as the homes of the residents, which it is obviously, and because they can't consent to have their homes visited, then they kind of leave it at that. Of course, it's other sanctuaries are kind of famous for doing their open days. So again, it's an interesting one where the other animals effectively don't have the choice. We're making, we're calling the shots again. So
Kind of like almost segues into the kind of discussion around our dog friends and making decisions on their behalf. They're kind of trapped between two worlds. And as far as sanctuary, the other animals of
mm,
sanctuary, I mean, to me, they're the best ones to address this question, is really bringing them into the discussion. And it's really hard to speak on their behalf, and try to suggest we know what they're thinking. However, if I was one of them, I would want to think that at least some of them would want to help their animals, and say, sure, if you want to take a short video of me and put it on social media, as long as it's done in a respectful way, I would think that they would want that. So, but it's a bit of a guessing game, isn't it? But I think as long as we put their interests at the center of the discussion, and we're always mindful of that, hopefully, that steers us fairly straight. Should we go to Irene's question?
Yeah, we could. I can't scroll around in it now at the moment, so I'm having difficulty seeing them. But yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, the internet may be a bit slow. But yeah, I've got it up on the main screen there. So Irene's asking, and this is one up your alley, Roger, and myself, is what are the best books on AR in your opinion? And this is a very timely question, isn't it? Because we're all in our houses twiddling our thumbs to a certain extent. So he's got it on the ready.
Yeah, this one is the one that I kind of always recommend as a first read for people who are interested in rights-based animal rights. So we're talking about Tom Regan, 2001, Defending Animal Rights. And that's an easier in to Reagan than the case. I'm referring to the case for animal rights, 1983. And so that's a kind of dense philosophical text and laid down the foundation for what we now regard as abolitionist animal rights or rights-based animal rights. And but yeah, that book there. In fact, I do have a video. If people go to my YouTube channel, there is a recent video. I think it's probably about I don't know, 7 in now, I suppose, where I kind of run through 10 books that I recommend, and that Reagan one is number 1. So I would definitely go there, But there was other ones in the mix, Sexual Politics of Meat by Kyle Adams, and others that made the cut, as it were.
Yeah, I'll do a quick rundown. This was one of the first ones that came up for me, is Motivational Methods for Vegan Advocacy, by Casey Taft, and that to me was really empowered me to be a better communicator, which I think at a basic level, we can all do these things and figure things out as we go. However, it really helped to have a framework around that to really go into conversations with a bit more confidence. For the philosophers out there, the case for animal rights, building on the defending animal rights, I would also throw out there. This is definitely more in depth, but that just completely flipped my whole mindset, and a lot of the things we discuss on this show are inspired by that. We did not plan this question, but Roger and I just both have a bunch of books sitting next to us. Another one I chuck out there is Aphorism. It's a fantastic one for kind of out-of-the-box thinking. There's a really good chapter in there about, well, all the chapters are excellent, but one that really spoke to me around when we're making these comparisons between humans and other animals, how to do that to not over-rely on that and let other animals stand on their own while still doing it in a mindful way that's bridging those connections that we all kind of experience life and have that, foul claim to basic moral rights. Yeah, and might as well do a quick pitch for I think we both have a book on the way that we're going to be reading together, don't we?
Yeah, fellow creatures,
a few days
right?
behind on the postage system, I think, but it's arrived at mine.
Yeah. well,
yeah.
Fellow creatures, right?
Yeah, Fellow Creatures by Christine Korsgaard. I'm just started it, just a chapter in or so, and really good book. And to me, I'm really excited about the premise of a rights-based text that's written by another high-level philosopher. So that came out in 2018, so that's quite a new one. So yeah, for anyone else that's watching this, that you've had a book that's inspired you, I'm sure there's lots. I think Roger could probably speak to this a bit, but I think we're not necessarily a generation of readers, speaking for myself. It's more of a exception rather than a rule. And I know I was resistant at first, but I'm so glad I started to really focus in on a few key texts, because it's a really nice way to give the minds a break and think about new ideas.
So did you say you're 20 pages in?
Thereabouts, yeah.
Yeah, well, so you're going slow so I can catch up, or you're just a slow reader?
I felt like something like, I figured I'd be kind and let you catch up. Yeah, so I don't want to get too far ahead, give you all the spoilers before you get to them. It's kind of like watching a movie.
If we're waving books about on our desk, and this is one.
Just keep going until we each run out.
Yeah. Well, that's my last one to hand, but that's Ronnie Lee's biography, and it's quite expensive to buy. Although I think Ronnie has found a way of getting a cheap supply. I think he broke a few rules and got some. Also, there's a podcast with Ronnie talking about his book, which is on my podcast. So if people want that, they can drop me a comment and I'll send them the link. Going back to what you said about Casey Taft, if this is especially good probably for more recent vegans. If you go to Vegan Publishers Facebook page and click on the videos tab and then scroll down, you'll have to scroll a good way, but there's a Casey Taft video about self-care and about vegans looking after themselves and about the kind of, if you like, the psychological toll of being a vegan in a non-vegan world. And that is something that is a real issue in the sense that, people, when they get 18 months into 3-4 years in, that's the time, in my experience, when, vegans are liable to get a bit depressed and feel as though we're not getting anywhere and this kind of stuff, and you need to kind of get over that little bump in a sense, because it's easy to get very frustrated because, you're there at your supermarket and you see everybody piling all the dead bodies into their trolleys and this kind of stuff, and you're thinking, no, nobody is getting this, nobody is waking up to this. The thing that is kind of really kind of very forceful in your life at this stage, and other people seem to be totally oblivious to it. It's very painful for vegans, So Casey Taft's video, can't remember the name of it now, but it's something to do with self-care. So you would find it anyway. So
Yeah, I know the name of one. It's I believe the title talks trauma and animal advocacy, and it's on YouTube as well.
oh, is it? Yeah, okay, right.
Yeah, behind the scenes knowledge, I actually filmed that one, so that was before I got proper filming equipment. So the message is strong, but bearing that in mind. But
Oh,
yeah.
you're giving yourself a technological out already, are you? Right,
Well, all you have to do is go back a couple of weeks and watch our pilot episode, and you'll see that there's been some improvements in the tech department of our two animal advocacy headquarters.
you do, don't you? Yeah, there is a bit of a difference. There was a message there about someone, Brad, I think, who's read Defending. If you want to read that one out, Jeremy, I can't see it. It's disappeared from my screen again. I have to do some more work on this screen for me.
Well, I see this one from Tom. I recently read Defending Animal Rights. It's a very insightful read. Tom Reagan writes about other forms of injustice through the weaves of animal rights. I haven't seen Brad's comment. Just a general comment on the comments. If we do miss something, it's not intentional, so just keep chucking it in there. We won't be bothered if it's duplication, and there's a better chance of us seeing it if we have missed it. And let's see, we got another question. What animal rights themed podcast would you recommend?
Oh,
you wouldn't know any podcasts, would you, Roger?
No.
Not a one.
No, I haven't got a clue. No. Adam says, "Your Child or the Dog" by Gary Francione is good. Yeah, that's I think that's from 2010, I think, and that's actually that's the subtitle. So I'm trying to remember what the title is.
The quiz was last week, and we're getting quizzed here, eh?
Yeah, I know, yeah. Podcasts.
Yeah. I know
yeah,
a couple that have been influenced.
Yeah, Camilla has already said Beyond Species and Let's Rage Together. Yeah, they're good podcasts. There's also my own one, which is on human, non-human relations podcasts. I'd obviously recommend that for some reason. But also the Vegan Bros, I think it's the Vegan Bros, isn't it? That's a good podcast. There are quite.
Are you familiar with this one? I'm not sure if that's the name of a podcast or if this is in relation to something else. Maybe Ian can clarify in the comments. Is Scum Remover a podcast, or is that in relation to a different comment thread? Because on my platform, I can't actually see if comments are nested. They just all comment at once. So, and here's a shout out for.
that's on the thread to how to clean your sink, isn't it? That's a scum remover one.
I didn't realize that was that kind of a Q&A. So if you had that really stuck on grind, the way to do it. Yeah, Adam's done that shout out for the fellow creatures. I think Adam may have been the source of who put us onto that. But yeah, it sounds like a lot of us will be reading that. So, because there is a huge focus on that in the book as far as whether or not humans should be considered as superior. Because I think if we go back a few decades to some of the more influential texts, such as the Case for Animal Rights and Animal Liberation, some of those, they do still rank humans above other animals. And just kind of begging the question is that, should we be doing that? And is it better, does it improve our advocacy or perhaps weaken it?
Yeah, Adam's just clarified that the full title of the Francione book is called Introduction to Animal Rights, which is the one that I'd forgotten. Chapter 3 is interesting in the sense that he says that vivisection is the only use which is non-trivial. So that's a controversial aspect. That's interesting.
Right. Yeah, and something I think I've heard from you is that's kind of stuck with me is it's not other animals' fault that these things exist, within the human population. However, that's probably part of a bigger discussion there. We've also got a shout out for Main Street Vegan. Have you listened to that one at all, Roger?
As a podcast, no. I've got a Victoria Moran book. It's called "Compassion is the Ultimate Ethic." And in fact, I use one of her quotes in my talks about the vegan pioneers. So. Oh, just to clarify one thing, I mention the vegan pioneers a lot, but when I talk about them, I'm not really saying that their views are set in stone and they can't be challenged. I'm just really saying that if you want to challenge them, then learn what they are rather than just dismiss them. I mean, I've had Facebook messages just say F the founders. Well, I don't think that's acceptable. I mean, I think if you want to say, well, their views on this, and of course, they are products of their time, so that the language they use obviously is very sexist. Talk about man, for humanity, that kind of stuff. But the point is, if you want to challenge them, then learn what they say and challenge what they say. Don't just challenge that they exist or something. So.
Yeah, just that kind of willingness to learn, isn't it? Well, I think, unless I've missed anything, I think we've covered the live questions. So should we go? I think we have 2 more prepared questions, and I think we were loosely going to try to target an hour for this. We'll see if we're able to stick to that. But if you do have any questions, keep those coming in the comments. And if we do miss any, I do go through these afterwards when I can have a more detailed look. So if we do miss anything, we'll add them to our next Q&A. So anything you want discussed or you think was beneficial for others, please go ahead and chuck that in the comments, and it can even be just your own personal experience about something you might like to share. Yeah, let's go to the pre-prepared questions here. So, Eric asks, though the AR and vegan movement is now much more widespread than in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, could not it be even more efficient if more coordinated? Message, campaigns, and structures on a global level. What is missing to achieve that, and why no genuine international movement at the moment, but always more and more charities, groups, etc., with no real consistent message?
So, do you want to take that, Jeremy, or do you want me to take that one? I mean, actually,
it's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there's an echo.
Well, I wasn't around in the first part of that question, so.
Oh, it's my fault for being around now, is it?
Yeah. You were in the room, so you have to speak towards it.
Actually, with this lockdown, I'm getting very round. I'm putting on a bit of weight, so I'm going to have to do something about that. Yeah, well, yeah, we're back to coordination and collaboration. My view is controversial on this in the sense that, as I said, the grassroots usually are the ones who are much more likely to collaborate and get together for events and then split and do their own things again. I gave the example of the Hunt Sabs earlier. My view is that most of the national and international groups that exist now don't need to be there. We could close them down quite happily. I mean, we're talking about the age of the internet here. We've got global instant communication. I mean, people from all over the world could be, kind of viewing this right now, and so you
We
don't
hope so.
actually, yeah. So you don't need these big structures, which have got a lot of wages involved. You've got a lot of duplication involved, and these are problems. My own view is if we had a well-funded, and we had to organize a mechanism to do this, but you have a well-funded grassroots campaign all over the world, we would have the kind of campaigning which I think is what's needed for the future. So you'd have a lot more street work because you could facilitate a lot more street work. So that would get into the kind of Ronnie Lee areas where he wants vegan events to be happening everywhere rather than just in the big cities. So he wants it in the suburbs and the towns, the villages, those kind of things. I mean, Ronnie's solution would be for the national groups to get together, in kind of like the light of this question, to get together and coordinate those kind of things. I don't think the national groups are even needed. I mean, we just don't need these structures because they essentially can't do anything that we can't do. And sometimes people have said to me in the past, less likely now because I mean, the grassroots are putting out some really good quality material now. But people have said things like, well, X group puts out really good quality videos. And I've always said, well, that's not because they know more than anybody else. It's because they got more money than anybody else. So if people have got the equipment, the grassroots, if they have the equipment and they've got the if it's if we can facilitate their activities, then they can go and get the undercover stuff. They can go and get this. They can they can produce good leaflets. They can whatever is needed. Those things are just a product of money. So the fact that a national group's literature might look better than a local group's literature, that's the only thing that's a difference is money there. That's the only difference.
Well, I guess back to the undercover investigations, the question I can't help but think of is, do we actually need to be doing that? Because to me, if it's a strong rights-based message, it doesn't actually matter how it's being done. So do we actually need current footage compared to, what we've already got? Or even local, that
Well,
brings up also the local versus non-local footage,
yeah, well, that's the point. And the usual questions that you get asked on the street, and you'll have had experience with this, Jeremy, and I certainly have, is people ask those two questions. Where was that and when was that? And so if you tend
Does it matter? Does it matter? Yeah. Almost, yeah.
Yeah, but the point is, if you say that to people, well, that was 20 years ago and it was in New York, and you're stood there in Dublin, their instinct then is to say, well, that's got nothing to do with us then, and it might not even be happening now. You're just kind of cherry picking the worst stuff, historically, and show me that. But our farms, like this plays into the farmers in every country. We all know this. Everybody tuning in knows this. That the farmers will say that their particular country, wherever it is, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, Britain, their particular country has got the best so-called welfare in the world. And
It's a bigger question, isn't it? Yeah, around footage. Yeah, I mean, it is, what we want to show happening in that footage. I know I put together some of my own footage that really tries to steer clear of any focus on conditions or abuse, as it were. That's really showing those what could be considered exceptional circumstances, or to your point, it could give ammunition to those who do use other animals to say, oh, well, we don't do it that way. And if we show it in a very objective way, and then saying, focusing on them as individuals and their right to be respected through both not needlessly breeding or killing them, I think that might be a more compelling argument and doesn't hinge on current or local footage.
The question that Eric asked, though, is been asked for years. Why can't we kind of have a more kind of coordinated thing? And also the consistent message. That's an interesting question in itself, about whether consistency is valuable. The people who take a kind of abolitionist line always assume and believe that a consistent vegan-based, and I would say rights-based message is the best thing, to put out there. Other people are kind of more tactical about it, and say that you can, as it were, appeal to people in different places, go to where they are. So, and until recently, for example, the national groups were very reluctant to use the word vegan. It's only really in the last 5 years, maybe in the last 4 years, that all the national groups now that you can think of are pushing the vegan message. They were actively opposed to it for a long time, and they would prefer to use words like veg and veggie, and even that horrible word vegan, VEG*N, which I absolutely hate that. And
Tell us how you really feel, Roger.
no, I
Just let me know so I can bleep you.
I dislike that one, and yeah, and so, but I mean, really, again, this is where the grassroots are the kind of leadership, to use that word, in the movement, because the national groups had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the vegan paradigm. They were always scared of it. They much preferred to have vegetarian and vegan, or just vegetarian, or veggie, veg, those kind of things. So you get a very powerful video. At the end of it, you'd have go veg, But now, of course, now that they've discovered that veganism is not a scare word, which they themselves were claiming only 5 years ago, they are much more likely to put out a consistent message. So I suppose really, now that we've got over this scare within the national groups, that people are going to be scared away if you're going to use the word vegan. I mean, the national groups had to start using the word vegan. It's all over the supermarkets and it's all over the cafes and everything. And people say, "Oh, vegan menu and vegan this, that, and the other," and it's almost like they've been completely proved totally wrong. The so-called vegan strategist who's been arguing for years that veganism is a scare word. The Melanie Joy camp that has been in that kind of, vegetarian, don't say vegan, it will put people off. Don't say speciesism, that's too complicated. Don't say animal rights, that's too militant. These people have been proven totally wrong. So I suppose in that sense, there is more consistency of message now. So even
at
the
least within the grassroots, perhaps, and I guess that begs the bigger question: should we be trying to change the structure or work within it, and just accept that these national groups are kind of out of our realm of influence and do
tear them
own
down,
thing?
folks. Tear them down.
I can't edit live videos, Raji. You can't say anything.
Stop donating to the national groups.
People are going to take snippets of this. They're going to circulate around the internet, and we won't be finished. Oh,
yeah, revolution.
I think I'm losing my internet. Gonna have to switch off here.
Power to the people.
Well, I think it is I think it really does come down to the power of the individual. And I think bridging that to Eric's question of this international movement, can that be done on a grassroots basis? And really that strong rights-based view, but also from a consistent message perspective. I think it comes back to language, because to me that's the biggest, most accessible way we can all evolve our advocacy. And just in simple ways, referring to other animals as them instead of it. But obviously it goes a lot wider than that.
Yeah, that's one issue that we're going to have to address. In fact, that's one of our remit, isn't it, for the show, is to address language, which is kind of your specialism, really, as well as mine. So, just to clarify one thing, Adam says when Gary and I believe Roger say that vivisection is not a trivial issue of animals, aren't they saying that the use is? They're not saying that the use is. Yeah, okay. So no, that's not the one. There's a later one from Adam. Francion's position is that he's opposed to all vivisection, and if that kind of proverbial kind of mythological thing about, if we can research on one rat and that would cure cancer, would you still be against it? And Francione would say that he would be against it, I mean, it's one of those silly kind of hypotheticals that philosophers get themselves involved in, as we know. But yeah, no, he's not saying. Basically, what he was trying to say is that all the other types of use can only be understood in terms of triviality, in terms of convenience or taste or the pleasure that you get from them, And he's saying arguably vivisection is the area that can be bracketed off from that. But the vast majority of animal use is actually fairly trivial and mundane, which is almost like adds to the tragedy of animal use in the sense that, these billions of other animals are being tortured for something that none of us need at all. And that goes back to the depression that vegans will sometimes encounter, because they're tearing their hair out saying, you don't even need this stuff that you're piling into your into your shopping basket. What's the matter with you, type of thing,
Well, I think that segues nicely into Nancy's question, which is, should we be using the pandemic as an entry point to talk about veganism, or does it just bring the focus back to human benefits and not the animals? And I think alongside of that, we know they're actively looking for a vaccine. I think we know animal testing is likely to be a part of that. So I think it segues into that. But I think it's a great point Nancy raises, because to me, if we did choose to do it, any linkage between animal use and the pandemic is more of a plant-based message. We're not saying we shouldn't violate the rights of others for their sake. We're saying we shouldn't do it for our sake. So it's more for our own health, as it were.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean,
You're speechless. It only took 50 minutes, but we've got you speechless. Good questions. Keep them coming. We've got Roger speechless. So.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I was
hey, you call me. It goes both ways. This is a non-hierarchical show. There's equal give and take.
I was being considerate with my answer here, because in a sense we've kind of dealt with this question before, and that was the pilot show, really, in a way, because we came to the conclusion that timing is an issue. There's still going back to my interview with Seb Alex recently, there is some research now, new research that's coming through all the time about the origins of the pandemic. And that's still not certain. It's all full of kind of theories in that sense. It seems to be that other animals are seen as the origin, and the most likely candidate is bats. And then there's a lot of argument and debate about the intermediary other animal that went from bats to whoever, and then to humans, And then there's the issue of where, because Seb was saying that a lot of the people in the Chinese markets were tested, and they were found to be negative, and the other animals were found to be negative when they were tested as well. So the actual origin and where and how and everything, those are still kind of questions that need to come. The problem that I see in this entire thing is the fact that this has been, as usual, in an animal welfare movement that we're saddled with, is that everything goes back to animal welfare. So whenever I've seen this discussed, it's been about factory farming, and it's about the damn Chinese wet markets and all that. And the implication throughout all this is that if we could go back to humane, free-range farming, then you wouldn't get these pandemics, and it's factory farming that's the problem. So
and those racist undertones that you hit on, that as if one country's use is acceptable and another country's isn't.
Yeah, and then to Nancy's point directly, there's never any talk about animal rights, and anyway we're violating the rights of other animals here. It's all about the fact that, this is a big issue because humans are getting it, right? And of course, going to your point too, of course now other animals are getting it in the neck, literally, because we're researching on the other animals in order to find a cure or a vaccine, but we also researched on ferrets in order to find out the characteristics of the pandemic as well. So as usual, other animals lose right across the board, and they always have done. We kind of use them and abuse them, and that creates a problem. And then we violate their rights in order to try and solve their problems. If there's a problem with cramming too many chickens into one small space and they begin to fight, our solution then is to chop their beaks off. If there's a problem with cramming lots of piglets into an area, and they start to bite each other's tails, the solution is to cut their tails off and trim their teeth down. You know, we violate the rights of other animals right across the board, and we always have done. You know, it's a real kind of major problem. You know.
Yeah, it's humans at the center in capitalism when it comes to that business perspective, isn't it? How, yeah, they just be, they're treated as a resource.
But I mean, it's animal
Um,
use that gets us into these problems, and it's animal use that they're trying to get us out of it. It's almost like it's the cigarette the cigarette manufacturers give you cancer and then try and give you a cure for it. So
yeah. Well, and I think it begs the question, specific if we explore the whole vivisection side of things more. I'm quite intrigued by the whole idea of this 3D printing and testing on human cadavers or even consenting humans. Because we're not going to know how something interacts in humans until we do human trials. And there's examples throughout history of things that other animals are fine with, and fine with, in quotes. However, it doesn't, and it's actually, very deadly to humans. So it doesn't actually give a good indication. So we're actually distracting ourselves from finding a vaccine by almost doing these trials on other animals, and violating their
yeah,
rights. It's not, yeah.
actually, that's a really interesting point, and it could be a topic of either one of our kind of shows that are for publication or one of these Q&As. We could have a section about vivisection
Mm,
because the focus of the movement has moved away from vivisection. It used to be, and so there is a whole pile. I mean, I've got a whole pile of scientific anti-vivisection books. Robert Sharp and Hans Reusch and people like this. Sargent. All these people who have written about those scientific problems that you talk about. Now, it's important to understand, though, that the scientific anti-vivisection position is not an animal rights position, because again, it's kind of based on. In fact, Hans Reusch argued that we shouldn't use the moral argument against vivisection because people are selfish. They need to be told that other animal use in vivisection is scientific fraud and it doesn't work. And so therefore, if you support vivisection, more humans are going to die. And so we're back to this kind of pandemic kind of question that the issue is the fact that humans are the victims now suddenly. So that was always the tension between the rights-based people like myself and the scientific anti-vivisectionists, because some of the scientific anti-vivisectionists would argue that there's never been an animal experiment that's ever brought any benefit to humans, except in a legal sense, because once you've done your animal experiments, then you get legal permission to move into the human trials. And it's only when you move into the human trials when you start to get scientifically valid data for humans. It's the same as like you don't go to the vet. If you went to the vet and say can I have some pills you normally give to dogs for myself, they would say, well, no, these are designed for dogs. And yet we routinely test on dogs in order to to try and find the usefulness of a drug compound for humans. But really, it's only when humans start to use it, and also for a long time, that you really start to get proper data. Otherwise, you're just whistling in the wind. I mean, even with some, they found that flicking a coin was just as valuable. You could predict the efficacy of drugs and the non-toxicity of drugs by flipping a coin just as well as putting it through the laboratory. They're that kind of bad in that scientifically they're rubbish, because they're dealing with other systems. They're trying to create human problems in other animals. So there's all kind of problems about extrapolation from species differences are a major problem. Even within humans, you've got problems between the genders. You've got age problems. If you test in young people, it doesn't necessarily tell you much about how this particular compound will work in the elderly, and vice versa. So you have to have it long-term human use really to know what you're dealing with. This is going to be the problem with the pandemic, because they're rushing through the vaccines. But I mean the vaccine, because they've been rushed, and they're presumably going to put it into a wide range of people. It's got a potential of creating havoc at first. So again, that's
yeah.
another controversial issue.
Yeah, we've got a couple questions relating to that also around language. Adam makes a good point here that the problem with the use of the word unnecessary is that when we advocate for animals, it's hard not to use the word, but it could give the impression to non-vegans that some exploitation is okay. That's something I try to be more mindful of because I oftentimes shorten what I say to needless breeding or killing, and I'm always careful to also weave in completely unnecessary attached to that, because I think there are, a successful message isn't necessarily on the sender side. It's also on the receiver. Did they actually receive the message? Because if people are being bombarded by a welfare-based message and that some use is okay, that's what people are going to jump to, and it's really hard to unpack that. Do you have any use, like alternatives or things you do in your communication with others, Roger, to kind of underpin that message that all animal use is unnecessary in the truest sense?
Yeah, you were breaking up quite badly then, but I think I got most of that, at least the gist of it. In fact, the concept of unnecessary suffering is a cornerstone of animal welfarism, that you're not allowed to create unnecessary suffering. The problem with all that is that unnecessary suffering automatically assumes, and it is true, that some suffering is deemed to be necessary. So, for example, if you get a welfare group like the ISPCA, RSPCA, Humane Society, they take a case to court and they are charged with causing unnecessary cruelty to other animals. And then say it's a pig farmer who's being prosecuted, then what the court does is say, well, what do pig farmers normally do to pigs? Because they're trying to find out if this one has created unnecessary suffering, in other words, unusually bad compared with what's the standard. And so
the framing's
what
broken
goes
from
on
the
in the
beginning,
industry,
isn't it?
yeah, it's broken. So yeah, unnecessary is like it's like an industry word, and it's also a word that kind of facilitates use. I mean, like it's not something that we need to get involved with, because again, as soon as you start talking about unnecessary suffering, for example, you are kind of, in a sense, in the kind of welfare paradigm. We can just say, well, we're opposed to animal use across the board, and then shift it away from the arguments about, well, is this suffering better than that suffering, and how do you rank it, and what about the hierarchy of suffering and all the rest of it. You can get involved, and even modern day spokespersons seem to feel the need to get involved with that conversation, whereas a rights-based position would just cut through all that and go, hang on a second, we're not talking about that. We're talking about rights here. We're talking about using them. We're talking about rights violations. It just cuts through, which is why I favor it, because it's much clearer, and also I think stronger. You just say, well, look, our position is quite clear on this. Animal use is a rights violation. Full stop.
And Carlo has an excellent question that kind of builds on that. Is doesn't the as far as is possible and practicable clause in the vegan society definition undermine animal rights? And if we must retain that clause in the definition within veganism/animal rights, what should the threshold for practicability be? And I would even add to that, the other thing in the definition I know is sticks out to both of us is the focus on animal cruelty. So that pins it right into the discussion we were just having. Are we trying to end animal cruelty as widely perceived by the public, or are we trying to end all use and all rights violations? To Carlos' point, I mean, do you want to touch on that kind of possible and practical? Do you think we're undermining our messaging by saying
Yeah,
that?
I could. The thing is, I think I'm about to lose I think my phone is about to lose.
Well, I think we've just lost Roger, so I'm not sure if we'll be able to rejoin us. We are just at the hour mark, so we probably about time to grind things to a close. To this point, I mean, I guess for me, I think there's certainly a risk there. I think because if we leave it down to the individual, which at the end of the day is kind of what we need to do, I think we're going to interpret that differently. So I'm curious to get Roger's thoughts on this too. However, I do think sending that clear message that all animal use is completely unnecessary is a good starting point, and we should be careful how we frame the definition because of it. And yeah, I think maybe we just come back to that question more the next time. And I think we've got another question that's come in here. I think I'm just getting binged from Roger. So let's see if we can bring Roger back into the call here. You're back with us, Roger. We're thinking thick and fast here on the Animal Rights Show here today. I can hear you if that helps. But yeah, I think it is really an interesting one because I think there is, even from within the movement, there's this message being sent that, oh, certain times when it's inconvenient. I mean, to me, that's one of the points I think that deserves a bit of attention within utilitarianism, and is that, if it's inconvenient, that some use is okay. And to me, I would align with that undermining the message of animal rights. So I think that's a great point around the wording there. As far as whether or not we would change the definition and shift away from that verbiage and shift away from that animal cruelty, I think that's possibly a different discussion. The cool thing is, as individuals, we can all choose how we want to present and frame our points. And I know I would certainly frame it in the most objective way possible, and then let people make their own decisions within their life from there. Did you hear any of that,
Yeah,
Roger?
sorry.
You back with us?
Yeah, no, I had to change systems. My phone has died. It's funny actually. It was fully charged and normally lasts all day, and so being on StreamYard must really take a lot of power.
Yep.
So we'll have to remember that next time. So yeah,
We were just talking about the possible and practicable. I don't know if you have any
yeah,
thoughts around that.
I know. I mean, it's obviously there for that kind of point about the fact that obviously in objective terms it's impossible to be vegan in a non-vegan world, and so it's in that sense that is there. You can kind of see the utility of that, and at the same time I can see how that kind of challenges the kind of the definiteness, if that's a word, of animal rights.
It is now.
Yeah. So
You said it, it's a word.
yeah, I mean, I can see how that would kind of work in the sense that there's a strain between the two ideas. I can see that because you can see why the vegan society have got that in the sense that there are just certain areas which sometimes, I mean, from a sociological point of view, would call as structural issues that can't really be dealt with by an individual. For example, the example I always give is the way that farmers harvest their crops, and until the vegan community gets more powerful, there's nothing much we can do about that as an individual, apart from the fact that we could make sure that we go to small holdings, we go to kind of farms that we know are kind of small scale kind of issues. You could go to places that are exclusively veganic in terms of production. That's the organic question that is still kind of hanging over us a little bit, perhaps. So yeah, you can understand why in a kind of non-vegan world and kind of having to live in it, that the kind of practical and possible thing, practicable, is there. You can understand that, but it does create that tension with the kind of definitiveness of animal rights. Yeah, I can see that.
So it sounds like we're on a similar page that, we may have to work within the framework of the definition for now, but on an individual level, we might both choose more objective wording.
Yeah, also, we've got to remember that the definition that everybody works with from the vegan society came about around about 1980, or in the 1980s, starting even, in fact, 1979. And so that definition is not very kind of, it's fairly weak compared with some of the earlier definitions, which just talked, I mean, like Watson in 1945 just talked about that the society is opposed to all exploitation of sentient life. So you could have that as the main definition. There are other issues that I always talk about in terms of the definition, is that the definition of something is not the end of the story. In fact, that's the very beginning of a story. I do tend to mention now that if you look in modern day internet definitions of things, especially in kind of like specialist groups, if it's a big idea, and the ones I use are things like the idea of Marxism or the idea of quantum mechanics, those definitions are full of hyperlinks going to aspects of the definition, and the reason for that is because those ideas are very big ideas. But the thing is, veganism is a big idea too, and so the full scope of veganism is not captured in the definition. And now, I mean, I think some moves could be made to make sure that the scope is more kind of obvious in the definition, but it's not at the moment. Yeah.
So why do you think the definition was effectively diluted over the years? I mean, that's almost like an early move towards this reduction, both in the overall message, isn't it? I mean, it sounds like, I mean, since the 40s, that's been something the movement's had to deal with. I mean, through your research of movement history, are there any ideas as to why they shifted definition? Was it to make it more accessible and relatable, or what was their thinking?
It was all those things in the sense that Arthur Ling from Plamil wanted to make the social movement more professional, and so wanted, for example, for the movement to get its own premises and stuff. And until then, the kind of general secretaries of the Vegan Society were just operating out of their own houses, effectively. You know, Kathleen Janaway was doing that, and so that was seen as a kind of problem because it kind of put a lot of emphasis on particular individuals, where the idea was to put emphasis on the cause, and the individuals kind of went to work at the cause rather than the cause in their house and all that being part and parcel of it. And so when we get down to then this particular definition that everybody works with, it was at a time when the society was becoming more professional, but also more stable as an organization. And so it was looking at a memorandum and articles of association. And so it was kind of firming up that to become a kind of more stable charity-based organization. So it was part and parcel of those kind of moves to establish itself for the future longevity of the cause rate or the actual group. You know, so it's all bound up in that. Exactly why you know, I kind of blame my generation for this, because we ignored the Vegan Society in those days, around about 1980. The Vegan Society wasn't seen as part of the movement, as far as we're concerned. The ironic situation is, if you describe the animal rights movement in those days, then compassionate farming would be seen as part of it. The League Against School Sports would be seen as part of it, but the Vegan Society wouldn't be seen as part of it. It was a kind of, now looking back, in the same way, there's lots of things looking back from. I feel a little bit sorry for newbie vegans, because they must listen to some of the things that I say and think, you know, how can that be? You know, and how can it be that veganism is the cornerstone concept of the movement, but it's only been like that for maximum 25 years? How can that be? But it's true, you know, and it's a kind of weird thing, you know, the fact that we were all campaigning. You know, we're all busy campaigning, and we were a hell of a lot busy in the 1980s. There was a heck of a lot of things going on all across the board, but veganism wasn't central to any of it. And you think, well, how can that even be? And it's almost like a question.
And now veganism's the center of it, and animal rights isn't. The true philosophy of animal rights isn't. So it's almost moving the bar. Sorry to cut you off there. You're finishing.
No, yeah. Well, again, you know, I mean, there was always a struggle. There's always a struggle on the animal rights front that you raised there, because, you know, animal rights has always been in battle with animal welfareism, you know, and then they started to become more clarified when the work of Tom Reagan became more known. And then essentially the history of the movement effectively says that we silenced Reagan. We silenced him. You know, I mean, like I always say, that the animal rights movement has treated Tom Reagan, who wrote the case for animal rights, in a completely shoddy way, a disgusting way. You know, and I mean, we should be ashamed of ourselves about the way that Tom Reagan was treated. And of course, then you get, if you like, Tom Reagan's disciple, Gary Francione, on the scene. And that created a new conversation when, you know, ideas like new welfareism and stuff came in. But of course, you know, people who saw themselves as radical don't like being called animal welfareists. And so new welfareism, rather than being a kind of analytical concept, became a slur, you know, a kind of cudgel to bash people with, you know. And it was a real kind of shame, in a sense, because in terms of what it meant, animal welfareism had a lot going for it. But in terms of how it was used, it became a problem. And then, you know, in the way that the abolitionist approach evolved, also became a problem, because, I mean, Francione became almost like a bit of a laughingstock, because his ideas diminished as his divisiveness grew and everybody turned on him. And even the people who would really naturally be allies to the abolitionist approach were rejected by that approach, and so everybody who's not in the abolitionist approach is now a welfarist. And so the abolitionist approach, I mean, I wrote a blog article several years ago saying that the abolitionist approach is not fit for purpose, and unfortunately that's still the case. The idea was for it to re-inject the movement with animal rights. It's not done that. It's completely failed. It's a real, I mean, that, and again, it's a real shame.
Do you think that's a characteristic of radical ideas to begin with? Do you think within social movements that the most radical ideas stay kind of on the fringes and just gradually over time they're more and more adopted, hopefully? Do you think that's characteristic of the animal movement as well?
There's a lot of social movement theory on that, and the modern day scholar who's most active in that area that I know of at the moment is probably Corey Wren. So if you check out Corey Wren's work, Corey Lee Wren, and I did a podcast recently. If again people want to listen to that, they can contact me and I'll give them the link. But essentially, that is the kind of burden of a movement is that the bigger it gets, the more moderate it gets, and so the radicalism tends to go, and it's usually the radicalism is usually kept alive by the younger members, and that even is not even happening in the vegan movement. It's something that I brought up with Seb Alex, in the fact that I've been quite shocked to find that the modern people in the movement are quite moderate in their views. And it's more like, some boring old farts like myself who have still got the kind of radical, revolutionary kind of aspects of veganism. And, we've got to face it. Veganism is a very big revolutionary idea. If it was brought into being in the same way as the concept of animal rights, if it brought into being, it would transform the entire world, But, that all seems to have dropped away into moderation. And so I think now we've got an interesting mix of people in the movement who probably would claim themselves as abolitionists, but they're trying to get to abolition through the language of welfare, which from a Francione point of view means that they're new welfarists. And of course they wouldn't like that
which makes
label.
The question, is that the fastest path or is that a distraction tending all the use? And well, it looks like Thomas has a question. Where can we read the article you mentioned, Roger? I'm assuming they're referring to you mentioned, I believe, a Francione article around is the abolitionist approach fit for purpose? Do you have maybe we could drop some links in the
I'll try and find the link. I think I don't think I've still got that myself. I think it might still be on the Animal Rights Zone site, so I think it's going to be on there. But I mean, I think you can maybe if you even Google Roger Yates animal rights approach is not for purpose, that'll probably bring it up. But I think it'll probably be the Animal Rights Zone. They've got a Ning site. It's not their Facebook. They've got an actual website. So I think it'll be on there.
So if you're interested, just check back maybe later today or tomorrow, and we'll try to get that link at the top.
Yeah.
Because we love doing research and finding that stuff. So
no, we don't. Did you make a note of that? Did you, Jeremy?
It's right here. Can't let things drop through the cracks, can we?
No, I thought you did.
Speaking of not letting things drop through the cracks, maybe we have one last question.
Woo!
From our live audience. Louis asks, do you think the mentality of now is the time used against AR activism during this pandemic is problematic? This mentality can be from the public and also fellow activists.
So now is not the time. Now is not the time, yeah?
Oh, it does look like there's missing an N there, so now is not the time. So yeah, basically.
Well, I mean,
go ahead.
I'm guilty of saying that myself. I mean, I think the way this pandemic is playing out is it's become a major moral panic, and it's obviously a global crisis, or at least it's kind of. I know there's a lot of conspiracy ideas and there's lots of opposition to those kind of ideas, and that in a sense blown out of proportion. All those kind of arguments are ongoing and going to go on for a long time. But I suppose the argument is that if humanity is seen as in a position of extremis, which is exactly what it is now, that it's actual existential threat to humanity, then this is not the time when humanity is going to be most open to a vegan message, however relevant that is. And so I think at the very least that if we are going to make the case for the origins, veganism, etc., in relation to this pandemic, we've got to think very carefully about how to do it, choose our language very, very carefully, and try to frame it in a very diplomatic way, if it's possible, because I think otherwise...
Still speaking the truth. So it's not about
Yeah,
being apologetic. It's just a matter
no,
of being direct. I
just think otherwise people are going to just dismiss it, thinking that we're trying to get on a bandwagon of human suffering, which is not what we're doing. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to say, well, look, there are nuances and details of this pandemic. She's not getting a lot of media coverage relative to the fact that there is a pandemic and what we can do about it, etc. So all those points that the vegans are making are true. But we've already got evidence that when people say, well, in a vegan world, this wouldn't have happened, that's not a particularly kind of receivable message at the moment, even if it's, as you say, that might well be the truth, that we can say that with all justification. There's lots of merit in that.
It kind of begs the question, doesn't it? Because waiting until that moral panic is over, there could be a case made for that. However, on the flip side, you could also make the case that it won't be as central to people's thought processes if we wait. If we wait a year, let's say, and then we start talking about the stuff, people, it's already in the back of the memory. So almost finding that intersection between those two.
History is against us, Jeremy, isn't it? I mean, already we know that several of the other pandemics and problems that have been caused because of animal use, and that's never really kind of sunk in, if you like. So exactly why this one is another matter. This goes back to the coverage. The coverage so far has really focused on kind of factory farming and stuff, and it's kind of been based on the fact that this has been caused by our treatment of other animals, and if we were to alter that, then we would minimize the problem. So getting the kind of rights-based vegan message there that animal use is the problem ultimately might be more tricky, because that's not. I mean, that's never a message that people want to receive anyway, probably, arguably. At the same time, it's probably in a time of crisis and a real moral panic, it's probably the least time when we've got an audience for our message. So I don't think that means that we should be scared of our message. Obviously not. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to be clear about that. It's just we have to be very careful about how to use our message at this stage, I think. But then again, there's a case for that all the time. I mean, there's no point in. I mean, Tom Reagan made this point. You actually reach more people by talking to them rather than shouting at them, which kind of almost like counterintuitive, but that's true. So.
Yeah, and there's some more points coming through the comments around the definition, the framing of our points, specifically around that question around the possible and practicability side of things, and that that's the wrong comment I pulled up here. This one is that Adam's pointing out that I think that the clause is more about the nature of living and that it's causing harm is unavoidable, rather than suggesting that some use of other animals is necessary. So perhaps that's part of the way that we frame our points. And
yeah, but I thought that's what I said. But
just building on that. Yeah, not necessarily as a counterpoint. And Stephen has a good point here. He said, Stephen says that I find this to be a useful definition when talking to people about veganism and animal rights. The central tenet of veganism is the respect principle, according to which all sentient individuals, both human and non-human, share the same fundamental right to be treated with respect. From this, it follows that no sentient individual may be harmed merely on the grounds that others will benefit. That sounds very a bit of Reagan-y. Does that sound Reagan-y to you, Roger? Do you know the source of this one?
Yeah, it's an adaptation of something that Reagan said. Yeah.
And it looks like the link's just been shared in the comments there, because I think bringing it back to the respect principle, I mean, that's a central tenet of the case for animal rights. I guess being like you said, we're both passionate about language. The only adaptation I might consider making to that definition is removing the word treatment, especially given the discussions we've been having today around that just default position to fall back into that welfare paradigm versus being very focused on the respect and not using them and not
Yeah,
allowing
well,
grounds for that.
that was kind of like the dominant language at the time. So Reagan, as it were, fell into that. And like Reagan had quite a job to do in the sense that he needed to present a very radical idea. So if you frame a very radical idea in very unusual language, then that kind of makes the reception of that radical idea even harder. So you try to, look, I want to talk to you about something that might be difficult for you. I'm going to try and put it in language that you understand. I mean, like, what's the point? What's the point of not doing that, right? And so, just from a tactical point of view, it's back to that kind of thing about recipient design. If you talk to people in such an analytically complicated, philosophical, kind of dense kind of way, using all the kind of language that you want to use. I mean, Joan Danaher, in a way, kind of got into this issue. There's not much in the movement about Joan Danaher, but she put out a couple of really interesting books. One in particular was called Animal Equality, and the subtitle is Language and Liberation. And then Speciesism is a more well-known book. But there's not much in terms of her engagement in the movement. She was drummed out of the movement fairly quickly, but there is a couple of audio parts of Joan Danaher, and Joan Danaher had a particularly interesting way of talking because she was very cued into language, as you know, Jeremy, and so she wouldn't say farmer, she would say enslaver, and this kind of issue. But when you heard her speak, it was almost like going, what, in every sentence, you were kind of, what did you say? What did you say? Yeah. What do you
walk between?
Yeah. What did you say? What did you say? And it kind of stops you dead, which is why you've got to, you've got to be a social animal when you speak to people. You've got to frame your talk. I mean, this is all ethno again. You've got to frame your talk in a way that it can be received. Otherwise, there's no point. I mean,
and you're saying ethno to save doing what we're talking about right now and using complicated words and talking about ethno methodology? Is that the?
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, that's the complete.
As long as you shorten it.
Yeah, the irony.
30-letter word to like a 5-letter word abbreviation.
I know the irony of the discipline is incredible in the sense that it's got such a long word. Yeah.
Well, I've got a theory on that because I think around this language stuff, especially when we're with other animal advocates, I think that's a time to have a bit of fun with the language and try new things out. And if some people look back at us and they say, "Wait, what?" Then we know that when we are advocating and focusing on engaging with the vegan curious, maybe we should save some of those things for later. But then if there is wide adoption, maybe we find some new words that we can start using more.
I'm not quite sure if I understood a single thing you just said.
I'd like to pretend it was because there was the internet cutting up. Well, I guess to your point, like just not like keeping it simple, especially when we're speaking with vegan curious, and then I think within our own circles, I know sometimes the chats I have, I'll try new words out that I'm thinking about, like water animals as an example. So instead of referring to marine animals or aquatic animals or all these things, is water animals actually simpler, or are people going to say, wait, what? So trying that out, not necessarily in my day-to-day advocacy, but also. Within circles that I expect to be able to take those words on board is a bit of a trial and error. So, but it's not animal testing. I'm not testing on my fellow animal advocates.
Yeah,
that could get me into
it's all coming out now, folks. You use the word friends a lot, don't you, Jeremy? Which
I have
our animal friends or our other animal friends. Yeah.
A concept of the way I like to look at it is almost like a language chain. So for me, specifically, I think the point you're alluding to is almost moving from that pet to that companion animal, then that animal companion, and then realizing that actually none of those we would use for humans using that flip it to test it approach, and moving more towards saying furry friend, or ideally not focusing on their species at all and just focusing on them as individuals. Obviously, taking context into account, which it's tricky.
But I mean, it's interesting though. I mean, mean, like
There comes the butt. I knew there'd be a butt.
when you're friends with someone, I mean, like we're slight friends ourselves, aren't we, Jeremy?
So you'd like to think.
when you're
Once this is over, we're done.
yeah. When you're friends with somebody, it's kind of like a two-way street, isn't it? You know, they're friends with you, and you're friends with them. So there's an issue of consent in a way. I mean, like the other animals don't consent to be friends. It's a title that we kind of impose on them in a way, isn't it? In the same way as companion is, and pet is. I mean, these are just human constructs we impose on these beings that we have created for a purpose in a functionalist society. So it's an interesting one, really. You know.
What do you say at the moment?
Probably for another day.
I believe you have a cat friend there. Do you refer to them as your animal companion, or what are you doing at the moment? Or furry friend, or?
I would say something like the cat who I care for. I think I'm getting some kind of a call coming in from somewhere.
Well, on that note, before we have another something or other happen, I think that this has been great. So I think we've seen a lot of comments, and Tom actually raises a good point here, and this helps to underscore my point because for quite a while I'd moved towards referring to animal cousins that I've used in the past, and to Roger's point, I've shifted back away from using animal cousins, specifically from the context of I was using that testing approach and testing it with other animal advocates, and I found they weren't necessarily sure what I was saying. So then that made me question it. Am I actually losing my message by being a bit too complicated with it? So that's where I backed off and gone back to other animals.
That is quite Darwinian, though, isn't it?
Yeah, fellow creatures, and that we're all What's the Darwin quote that we're like?
Yeah, we're different in degree rather than kind.
That at the base we're all exactly.
Yeah. Now you mentioned this new book that you've got and I'm about to get. You were saying that they were defending their use of the word creature, right?
Well, yeah, I'm still formulating my thoughts around that one, but it's a
reading
really
slowly.
thoughtfully.
Well,
it is true. There's some books that I just really like to, take my time and let them ferment. And yeah, I think the framing is more so that oftentimes when people refer to animals, they don't necessarily think of humans. So it's still early days, but I believe Christine's intent is to articulate that creatures is all-encompassing for both humans and other animals, versus if she referred to humans and animals, it might be an accidental implication that they're separate groups when they're actually part of the same animal group.
Not using a word like beings.
Yeah, kind of similar along those lines too, yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, that's been a great chat. I think we're right around 90 minutes, which is probably a good time to start winding things down. But if you do have any questions, I do a detailed review of this afterwards. And if there are any questions we missed, I'll make sure that we incorporate them into our next Q&A. Even after we're done going live, feel free to keep the questions coming.
I feel free to reveal to the world that Jeremy does a detailed review of everything that he...
I used to fight it, but now I embrace it. So someone's got to keep order around here, right?
Well, yeah, I'm the sloppy one. I admit it, So
balance each other out, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for everyone for joining us. We do have, if I can flick up the screen, we're still quite new. I mean, the real inspiration behind doing this is really just to kind of bring people together and share ideas while we're all going through this pandemic together, and really try to create a bit of a virtual community and really just explore these things as a group versus, in our own minds. And so for our next one, we might do a Q&A, we might do a pub quiz if there's a format we haven't considered.
I've started working on a pub quiz, so...
Oh, do we have lots of fruit and music rounds in the next pub quiz?
No, we don't.
For those who joined our last quiz, we had a few rounds snuck in there that I think might have thrown a few people. So we're trying to find that middle of the road between where it's not too difficult or not too easy, a bit honed in. But
yeah, I'm sure when you did the fruit round, Jeremy, you must have Googled something like give me some pictures of fruit that absolutely no one in the entire world will have any idea
Well, I
about.
figured I don't know fruit that well, so I'm like, all right, well, I don't know what it is, but I'm sure other people will. But I was wrong in that regard. So we're evolving with each of these and hopefully moving in the right direction. So thank you all for your support. Stay safe and keep reaching out to each other. Any final words of wisdom, Roger? Any final jokes to send us away with?
I'm not going to start with words of wisdom after 90 minutes. So
If you had them, you already said them.
yeah, I've already said them. Yeah.
See everybody next time.
Bye now.